Thank you all for your participation. Today's selection is Coach Wooden and Me, Our 50-Year Friendship on and Off the Court by NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. An instant New York Times and USA Today bestseller, Coach Wooden and Me chronicles the lifelong friendship between Abdul-Jabbar and John Wooden, who led UCLA to a record 10 national championships over a 12-year span, and who was the first person to be inducted to the Basketball Hall of Fame as a player and coach. Our reviewer today is Louis Spiati, Executive Director, Intercollegiate Athletics at Rochester Institute of Technology. Spiati has been at RIT for 43 years. Under his leadership, RIT has represented the university regionally and nationally, winning scores of league titles, ECAC championships, and 3 national championships. For his body of work as an athlete, coach, and administrator, he was inducted into 6 Sports Halls of Fame. Following today's review, you will have the opportunity to ask questions, and we will also have a drawing for a copy of the book. And I'd also like to remind you that we have several copies of the book on hold at the main circulation desk if you're interested in taking those out on your way out this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Louis Spiati.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to see you all here. I see there's a lot of empty seats. I don't know what that means. It might mean that they found out that I was a football coach probably and realized that I don't know that much about basketball. If you look at my height, I think you'll probably be able to verify that pretty easily. I haven't been in the library for quite a few years. I remember coming here when I was a child. I'm a native of Rochester, New York. The family business, our family business, I always say, is education. My father was a teacher, coach here in Rochester for many years, served in the U.S. Navy in the city school district, and was a tremendous teacher, tremendous educator. And we valued education in our family. And my sister then became a teacher in the city school district and retired as well from the city school district. Both outstanding educators. And so I always think about me being in the family business. The family business is teaching, learning, working with young people. And that's what we learn. That's what we do best. As I said, I'm from Rochester, New York here, and born and raised here. And I know the city well. Been here most of my life with the exception of a stint in college at Ithaca. And then in the U.S. Navy myself for 6 years during the Vietnam era. Proudly served in the Navy. You may have questions about that later, I don't know. Went to Aquinas Institute here, played 3 sports. Became an All-American in football and boxing champion in mission bouts, and ran track and played baseball as well. And went on to Ithaca College and got my degree there in physical education and recreation. And played for the football team there and was inducted in our Hall of Fame a few years ago. We had a undefeated football team back in 1965. So that was a wonderful thing, and we all got inducted together in that. Launched my career here in the city school district as well, and then ended up at the University of Rochester as a football coach there. And then I guess my claim to fame was my next move was to RIT as the head football coach, and I replaced Tom Coughlin. Do you know who he is? Shake your head. Yeah, he was obviously the Hall of Fame coach, football coach, and a Super Bowl champion coach, and he was at RIT at one time, and I followed him. So that's my claim to fame in coaching. But I'm happy to be here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I did coach basketball a little bit in the city school district. I enjoyed it. I love the game of basketball. I love the college game, and I love watching our teams play. Last year, our women's basketball team went to the national championships, first time ever in the history of the school. So But the book, as Susan had said, was a book written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Coach Wooden and me, our 50-year friendship on and off the court. And I think that I think most of the book, as I read through it, was really off the court. He talked a little bit about what happened on the court and his coaching skills, and about Kareem's adaptation to his system, and what Kareem learned from him on the court, and later on in life in basketball when Kareem went into coaching. But it chronicles this long-term relationship between, as Susan had said, basketball coaching great John Wooden and one of the greatest athletes to ever play the game of basketball, and that's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think the book is wonderfully written. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Kareem wrote about Wooden 7 years after his death. He died in 2010, and it took him 7 years to get around to finishing or completing the book or writing the book. And I feel, as I read through it, I felt that it must have had to take a lot of thought. He had 50 years of a relationship with this man, and you don't sit down after he dies and write the book right away, because it's different than it would be when you're looking back and reflecting on it. But I think he had to give it a lot of thought. The depth and quality of the relationship, I'm sure he wanted to do it justice. The relationship, I don't know if any of you have read the book or not, but it's heartwarming, and for me it was inspirational as well. And justice, I believe, was well served by Kareem. And I had never read any books written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but as I talked with a couple of people about it who have read books written by him, he's an accomplished author and writer. And as I was downstairs walking through the library, I saw some of the books on display there about John Wooden, and certainly I think one was sitting there that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had written. So I believe its quality lies not only in the way it was assembled, but how it encompassed the 50 years, totality of 50 years of an enduring relationship. I got the book late in July and did not really start reading it right away, and finished it last week just on time. But I was reading another book. I have to make an excuse for myself. I was reading another book at the same time, and it's a book called Legacy by James Kerr. If you have a chance to read that, it was highly recommended by one of my coaches at RIT, our hockey coach, and he said, you got to read this. And it's about the New Zealand rugby team called the All Blacks, and their culture and how they developed into one of the most championship rugby teams in the history of the game. So this book, however, I brought along with me, begins with the recruiting process that brought Lou Alcindor, which is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's birth name, to UCLA. And recruiting, as I know it, is a combination of a lot of different things. It's selling your product, it's selling your institution, it's developing a relationship, it's convincing parents and people who surround this recruit that this is the right place for them. It's a combination of a lot of things where coaches really have to be great salespersons, but they have to develop this relationship to be able to generate the trust and sort of the allegiance and the commitment to come to my institution. In my case, it's RIT, and in this case, it's UCLA. And I see UCLA hat over here. Are you a fan or an alum? Wonderful. Congratulations. So Alcindor, Louis Alcindor, was a New York City youth who played at a city school called Power Memorial Academy, and he had a great coach who helped guide him through the recruiting process because there were so many people after him. It was amazing to read about it. He was highly sought after, and this coach helped him sort through all these institutions that were coming after him. In fact, I don't think there was any college or university that wouldn't give their eye teeth to bring him to their campus and play on their team. He was very tall. He grew to 7 feet 2 inches and was highly athletic, coordinated, and obviously in basketball skills. his high school coach, and John Wooden helped hone those skills, but Kareem was a tremendous athlete. And he had a very solid family life. Strict Catholic parents. His father was a policeman, and they were very protective of young Lewis. And I got to think his father, when he talks about his father's relationship with him, his father was, a policeman, a New York City policeman. He was very strict. He was a disciplinarian and so forth. And I think the relationship there, as he talked later on, that John Wooden became the kind of surrogate father that his birth father was not. Not that he said anything negative about his dad, but you kind of sensed that, throughout the book. And I thought that was interesting. As do many coaches, John Wooden made a home visit to the Alcindor home in New York City. And he was impressed with his parents, and they were impressed with him. They were evaluating whether they were going to entrust their son to him. And little did they know that Coach Wooden was evaluating them as well. And I'll tell you, I hear a lot of my coaches come back and say, I went to this game and I watched this young man or young woman play, and then I watched the parents. And then I ask myself, do I want those parents associated with a program for the next 4 or 5 years? Okay? True story. And sometimes gifted, good athletes are passed over because of overbearing parents. And I see a lot of it in my job. And it's become even more and more so these days. But it was interesting to see how this relationship with the family progressed. So they sent Lou into another room while they talked, and Kareem, Kareem put his ear to the door, is trying to hear what they were saying, but couldn't get it at all. He was just. Can you imagine this guy, tall guy, listening in the door and trying to figure out what was being said about him? But of course, he made a visit to UCLA, and that was the seal. It was very different. California is different than New York City, of course. Can you all hear me okay? Because I want to make sure that I'm sure that sometimes they talk softly. So John Wooden came from a very different background. He was a very straight-laced, conservative Midwesterner, and he too was a devout Christian. He readily quoted from the Bible and other religious works. His favorite book, believe it or not, was The Robe. He was known to have read it several times and many times quoted excerpts from it freely. And I think of another famous coach, not in basketball and football, Vince Lombardi, who was a disciplinarian, who was very disciplined, who was conservative. He was balancing between, Vince Lombardi was balancing between, do I go into coaching and education or do I become a priest? Okay? Now, these days, you think of some of these coaches, and you look at them, could that person be a priest? I don't think so. But, it's interesting to see those kinds of people end up, and it's great because they're great influences on our young people. So John Wooden was a taskmaster. He was a perfectionist and a disciplinarian. And Kareem would reference Wooden's conservative appearance and manner of speech in stark contrast to the type of people that he had seen in New York City. I think about Wooden, and I look at him, and I can almost picture the relationship and how he looked and how he appeared to Kareem, and with the two of them worked together, and they worked together beautifully. So what took place from there on out was nothing short of incredible and heartwarming. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar learned firsthand the meaning of preparation and how to win and win all the time. And as a matter of fact, I have one of my favorite sayings I've taken from Wooden. Actually, it came from Benjamin Franklin, but Wooden kind of revised it. And the saying is, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So I cut that out, and I put these little sayings right outside my office door. I change them every few weeks, and that's one of them I put up. It's got John Wooden right underneath. And that's the kind of guy he was. As a matter of fact, one of the first things he taught him, and I read in the book, taught his athletes was, does anybody know what it is? Put their socks on. Tug their socks on tightly, and tie those shoes tightly, and make sure the shoes are fitting properly. And he spent like a half an hour on teaching them how to do this. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's some wondering, what is this guy doing? I know how to put my shoes on. But the idea was, if you get a blister and it turns into an infection and you can't practice or you can't play, that hurts the performance of the team. We don't want any of that happening. So they spent time learning how to tie their shoes and put their socks on and tie their shoes. Imagine that. So Wooden became the winningest coach in all of college basketball, and Jabbar the highest scoring player of all time. And they were an insurmountable duo which won many championships, and Susan referenced that, in national titles. And their record together was phenomenal. It was something like 149-3. It was just incredible. But really what occurred over their 50 years of friendship in many ways had little to do with basketball. The bulk of their relationship took place after Kareem's career at UCLA was over, and how they spent time together and communicated with one another and developed their relationship. Together they faced, and quite a bit of the book is facing the ugliness of racism and the fight for civil rights in the mid-1900s. And Jabbar became deeply involved in the civil rights movement and eventually became a strong voice and even an activist. He became connected to some of the most powerful civil rights activists in history, including many followers of Reverend Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and boxing champion. He had gotten to know Muhammad Ali quite well through Muhammad Ali's career and life. I was fortunate to meet him at one time, too. During that time, Lou Alcindor embraced the Muslim faith and changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And John Wooden, a conservative Midwestern Christian who, according to Kareem, parted his hair down the middle. He looked like alfalfa from the TV program, and it was funny because I remember that when I was a kid. Helped guide his player through this time, particularly supporting him as he faced some of the ugliness that a young man would face with racism. And then one might think, why not? After all, he was the greatest basketball player he would ever coach. He would virtually guarantee championships, but their respect and love for one another went far beyond that. He was his coach, mentor, and sometimes a surrogate parent. And Jabbar was there with his friend and mentor right to his deathbed. At a time, as time went by and the days at UCLA faded, they became engaged in all kinds of efforts and discussed and became immersed in national issues. They would frequently meet for lunch or dinner, watched games in the coach's celebrated den. There's a picture in the book of his den with hundreds of trophies and medallions and certificates. It's amazing to look at. You should look at it in the book. And it's pictured with these championship trophies. And I know we have a trophy case with a lot of trophies, but this is like over the top. It's pretty amazing. Together they explored the sports world. Basketball and baseball were their favorites. They talked about baseball quite a bit and shared thoughts on that. But so was religion, politics, and so many other topics. It was amusing to read Kareem's description of the conversations in which they would engage in as they sat there together, coach, player, mentor, mentee, surrogate father, son, and it was an interesting thing. So they supported one another through many life's crises. Kareem had a deep, enduring love for this man who was his guiding light. And for John Wooden, he was blessed with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in his life. He was there for him, for John. The role reversal later on in life was stunning. So I think, how does this, a question was asked of me, how does this relate to Rochester, this book? And I thought about that because that question was asked, when would you discuss this, and how does it relate to the city of Rochester? And I could think of a lot of other things it could relate to, but I had to think hard about that. And I came down on the thought that I think of this town, this city, this community, city where I was born and raised, where my family settled and made a living, and where my parents and my sister and had an impact on the community. My parents were deeply involved in the community of Rochester. It's also where I lived and worked most of my entire life. I believe I know the community of Rochester, and I think it's a community that possesses values. I think it's a value-based community, and the leadership, the people here, and how we care for one another is stunning. The same kinds of values John Wooden espoused: respect, integrity, strong work ethic, and a sense for community. As a matter of fact, he developed, and it is not mentioned much in the book, but I Googled it a little bit. He developed this philosophy or system that he calls the Pyramid of Success. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that, but I've got some copies here for you. The Pyramid of Success, John Wooden's Pyramid of Success, and he taught it, he lectured about it, he espoused it to his players, to everyone around him. He gave workshops, he talked to business leaders, he talked to government leaders about this Pyramid of Success. And it is indeed a pyramid. And it's not a pyramid of success in sports. It's a pyramid of success in life. It's not necessarily about business. It has to do with to lead the most fulfilling life you can possibly lead. And the things that he talks about are loyalty and friendship and industriousness and enthusiasm and initiative, team spirit and condition and confidence and poise. All those things I see and I talk about with my own student athletes at RIT. So Rochester, I believe, is a good town with a population that cares about one another. It's a city that is a great place to raise a family with a strong educational system and a deep abiding respect for the differences in all people. That's what I was taught by my parents. That's what was assimilated into our family. And I think that John Wooden believed it, and certainly Kareem. I was particularly struck by the way John Wooden helped Kareem work his way through those periods, difficult periods of time. And I think we all can, as a community, learn a lesson from those two. For me, much of what I read resonated with the things that I've learned over my 50 years in athletics and what we preach to our coaches and our student athletes, our core values, the things that we believe in the most, the things that we want to communicate to our young people the most. I think the things that John Wooden and Kareem was communicating about, what John Wooden did. He was teaching basketball, but more importantly, he was teaching things about life, how to be a good person. And there's no question in my mind, because I've seen this over and over again with some of the wonderful coaches that I've come in contact with. Our core values are important to us and how it relates to not only what they are doing here and now, but also the quality of their lives going forward. And all the successes that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had, and many of his other players at UCLA, I'm sure can be attributed and drawn back to their time with John Wooden. His philosophies align in many ways with mine. The emphasis on teamwork and sportsmanship and integrity and physical conditioning, and the habits and characteristics we instill and reinforce in his team and our teams. So these are pillars upon which a great organization is built, be it countries, businesses, communities like Rochester, teams, or even the most core unit, families. Families is our core unit. So there's so much, I think, that could be learned from this book and from the lives of these two incredible people. I derived a lot of satisfaction from reading, and I took my time. I didn't want to push through it. I read it and assimilated it, and I felt it was refreshing, inspiring, reinforcing, and in many ways therapeutic to be able to think about. There's people out there like these two guys that can develop this kind of relationship, even though they had this coach and player relationship, and one's driving the other, and the other one's, young man's got a mind of his own, and they came together. I thought Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's style was easy to embrace and understand. I like the way he writes. I think his objectives were achieved wonderfully. His recollection of historical elements and the backdrop for the development and fostering of this relationship, I thought were assembled chronologically well and masterfully. And I found him to be deeply humanistic and surprisingly skilled at this craft, because I didn't realize how much and how often he had written and what he has done. A bright guy. And I think about him. He's my contemporary. We're exactly the same age. Went through college at the same time, and so forth. And obviously lives take different paths. So it was a great experience for me, and I would highly recommend it. I'd highly recommend the book. I've talked with some of my coaches about it already, and some of them have read it, as a matter of fact, and others have not, and I would encourage them to do that. So the book ends with John Wooden's favorite poem. Not a basketball play, not a game, but a poem. It's called A Little Fellow Follows Me. And it goes like this. A careful man I must be, a little fellow follows me. I know I dare not go astray, for fear he'll go the self-same way. He thinks that I am good and fine, believes in every word of mine. The base in me he must not see, this little chap who follows me. I must be careful as I go through summer, sun, and winter snow, because I am building for the years to be this little chap who follows me. Wonderful little testimony. So I guess, Susan, that's it. I would be more than happy to take questions. And if you don't have questions, I wouldn't feel hurt. Thank you.